The camera. I never thought much about my doorbell. It was one of those small, square buttons next to the front door with a faint buzzing sound. It worked, it was reliable, and that was that. But then, about 2 months ago, the doorbell became something I dreaded, something I still don't understand. That it all started late one Thursday night. I had just finished binge watching some crime series and was getting ready for bed when I heard it. The doorbell rang, sharp and clear. I froze for a moment, looking at the clock. It was almost midnight. Who would be ringing my doorbell at this hour? I grabbed my phone, opened my security app, and checked the front door camera. But no one was there. The porch was empty, and the street was quiet. I thought maybe it was just a glitch or the wind had somehow set it off. I got up, peeked out the window, and saw nothing. So I shrugged it off, locked the door again, and went to bed. The next night, it happened again. This time, it was around 2 a.m. I was sound asleep when the doorbell rang. The same clear, loud sound that jolted me awake. I checked the camera right away, expecting some late-night visitor or a prankster, but again, nothing. No one was there. I went to the door, opened it, and looked around. Not a soul. The streetlights flickered slightly, but everything else was still. At this point, I started to feel uneasy. Maybe it was just some faulty wiring. I told myself I'd call someone to check it out, but the idea of someone messing with me was still in the back of my mind. The following week, the doorbell rang every single night. Always late, always with no one there. It became a routine. I'd wake up to the sound, check the camera, find nothing, and go back to bed, frustrated and tired. I even disconnected the doorbell one evening, thinking that would solve the problem. But that night, I was woken up not by the doorbell itself, but by the sound of it. Like it had rung in my head. It was this loud, jarring ring, and when I checked the camera, the same empty porch stared back at me. Things started to get weird after that point. One night, after the usual doorbell ring, I was lying in bed, too creeped out to go back to sleep. I was just staring at the ceiling, trying to calm myself down, when I heard footsteps. Not outside, but inside the house. They were soft at first, like someone creeping around, and they seemed to be coming from the hallway. That I shot out of bed and grabbed my phone, convinced that someone had broken in. I checked every room, one by one, but found nothing. I even checked the front door, but it was still locked. That's when I noticed the cold. The hallway felt freezing, way colder than the rest of the house. It was the middle of summer, and yet it felt like I'd stepped into a fridge. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but the cold lingered long after I'd gone back to bed. Then, the knocking started. At first, it was just once or twice, a soft, almost hesitant knock on the front door. I'd hear it late at night, usually around the same time the doorbell would ring. The first few times, I thought it was someone from the neighborhood, but I never found anyone there when I checked. The knocking grew more frequent, though, and louder. Some nights, it would be a rapid, frantic knocking, as if someone was desperate to get inside. I'd lie in bed, listening to it, heart pounding, but I couldn't bring myself to open the door. One night, around 3 a.m., the doorbell rang, followed by the knocking, but this time, it wasn't on the front door. It was coming from inside the house. I swear, I heard it clear as day, a series of knocks, soft and deliberate, echoing down the hallway. I froze, my whole body tensing up. I wasn't imagining it. Someone, or something, was knocking from inside. I grabbed my phone and, in a panic, opened the camera feed again. The live view showed the front door and porch empty as usual, but then something caught my eye. In the corner of the screen, I saw a shadow. It wasn't clear, just this dark, vague shape standing near the edge of the porch, almost out of view. It wasn't moving, but I knew it was watching. The knocks came again, closer this time, like they were just outside my bedroom door. I was paralyzed with fear. I didn't know what to do. I tried to stay as quiet as possible, hoping whatever it was would go away. Then, the door to my bedroom creaked open. I didn't move. I couldn't. My heart was beating so fast I thought it might burst out of my chest. The door opened slowly, and the cold air rushed in, colder than I'd ever felt it. I kept my eyes on the door, barely breathing, waiting to see what would happen. Nothing came through that I lay there for what felt like hours, staring at the open door, too scared to get up. Finally, as the first light of dawn crept through the windows, the cold faded, and the house felt normal again. I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, I decided I couldn't stay there anymore. Whatever was going on, it wasn't just some prank or faulty wiring. Something was wrong with the house. I packed a bag and stayed with a friend for a few days, too freaked out to go back that I eventually called someone to disconnect the doorbell completely, hoping that would at least stop the ringing. It didn't. Now, even without the doorbell connected, I still hear it. Every night, around the same time, the sound echoes through the house. Sometimes it's followed by the knocking, sometimes it's not. But the worst part, I've started seeing the shadow again. It's always there, just at the edge of my vision, lingering near the door or in the corners of the rooms. Watching. Waiting that I don't know what it wants. I don't know why it started. But I do know one thing, I can't escape it. Every night, the doorbell rings, and I know it's just a matter of time before whatever's on the other side decides to come in. The neighborhood. I've always lived in quiet, boring neighborhoods. You know, the kind where nothing ever happens, and everyone knows everyone. It's safe, and that's what I like about it. So, when I moved into this new place, I didn't think twice. It was a small house on a quiet street. The neighbors seemed friendly enough, and I felt like I could finally relax after a stressful few months. I never imagined the trouble would start with something as simple as a doorbell that I don't remember when it first began, but I do know it was late. Probably be around midnight, maybe a little later. I had just gone to bed and was about to drift off when I heard the doorbell ring. It startled me because, first of all, who the hell rings a doorbell that late? And second, I hadn't even realized the house had a doorbell until that moment. It must have been hidden somewhere, but I definitely heard it loud and clear that I sat up in bed, heart pounding, listening for any follow-up knocks or another ring, but nothing came. My mind immediately went to the worst-case scenario. Maybe someone was trying to break in or mess with me. I grabbed my phone and checked the front door camera I had installed a week earlier. The screen showed nothing. The porch was empty, and the street was quiet. No one was there that I figured it was probably a prank or maybe I was just hearing things, so I went back to bed, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, wondering if maybe I had just imagined it. Then, at around 3 a.m., the doorbell rang again. This time, it was even louder, more insistent. I jumped out of bed, grabbed my phone again, and checked the camera feed. Same result, the porch was empty. I walked to the front door, my heart racing, and opened it just a crack to peek outside. Still nothing. The street was completely still. No cars, no people, nothing that I didn't sleep much after that. The next night, I tried to shake it off. It had to be kids messing with me, right? I wasn't scared, not yet, just annoyed. But that night, the doorbell rang again, this time around 2 a.m. I sat up in bed, waited a few minutes, then went to check the camera. Still nothing. The porch was empty, just like before that I opened the door and looked around. No signs of anyone nearby. But then I noticed something strange. The air outside was colder than usual. I'm talking about an unnatural kind of cold, like walking into a freezer. It sent chills down my spine, and I quickly went back inside, locking the door behind me. This kept happening for the next few nights. The doorbell would ring at random times, always late at night, always when no one was there. By the fourth night, I started to feel this creeping sense of dread. There was no logical explanation for it. I'd even disconnected the doorbell at one point, but it kept ringing. One night, things got worse that I was sitting on the couch, trying to watch TV and forget about the whole thing, when the doorbell rang. This time, it was different. Instead of a single ring, it kept going, ding-dong, 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 non-stop, like someone was standing there holding the button down. My heart was pounding, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I didn't even bother checking the camera this time. I knew no one would be there that I stood up, my legs shaking, and slowly walked to the front door. The doorbell was still ringing, louder now, more insistent. I reached for the doorknob, hesitated for a moment, then swung it open. Nothing, but this time, the cold air hit me like a punch in the gut. It was freezing, way too cold for the season. My breath came out in visible puffs. I took a step back, trying to process what was happening, and then I saw it, standing at the far end of my front yard, near the edge of the street, was a figure. It was hard to make out in the dark, but I could tell it was tall, unnaturally tall, with long, thin limbs. It wasn't moving, just standing there, watching me. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its gaze locked on me that I slammed the door shut and locked it, my hands trembling. I backed away from the door, half expecting the doorbell to ring again, but the house fell into this eerie silence. No sound, no wind, nothing. Just the overwhelming feeling that something wasn't right, that I didn't sleep at all that night. The next day, I called an electrician to come check the wiring of the doorbell. I didn't mention the figure I saw, because honestly, I wasn't sure if I'd actually seen it or if my mind was playing tricks on me. The electrician came by, did a quick check, and told me everything was fine. There was no reason for the doorbell to be malfunctioning. That night, I braced myself for the worst. I sat in the living room, lights on, waiting for the doorbell to ring. Midnight came and went. Then 1 a.m. Then 2 a.m. Nothing. I started to relax, thinking maybe whatever it was had passed. Then, just as I was about to go to bed, the doorbell rang. But this time, it wasn't just ringing. It was accompanied by a soft, slow knock on the door. My heart nearly stopped. I checked the camera. The porch was empty, but I could hear the knocking. I could feel it, like someone was standing just inches away from the other side of the door that I didn't move. I just sat there, frozen, listening as the knock came again. Soft, deliberate. Then the doorbell rang again, and with it, the unmistakable sound of someone breathing on the other side of the door. That I grabbed my phone and called the police. I didn't care if they thought I was crazy. I needed someone else to be there, to witness it. I told them someone was outside my house, ringing the doorbell and knocking on the door. They said they'd send someone over right away. By the time the police arrived, everything had stopped. The doorbell, the knocking, the breathing, all of it. The officers checked around the house, but of course, they didn't find anything. No footprints, no signs of anyone being there. After they left, I tried to go back to bed, but I couldn't sleep. Every little sound in the house made my skin crawl. The next few nights were quiet, but I knew it wasn't over, and I was right that a week later, the doorbell started ringing again. But this time, I didn't go to the door. I couldn't. I was too scared of what I might find on the other side. I just sat in the living room, listening as the doorbell rang and rang, knowing that whatever was out there wasn't human. That I don't know what's happening to me, or why this is happening. But I do know one thing, it's not going to stop. The doorbell keeps ringing, and each time, it feels like it's getting closer, like whatever is on the other side is waiting for me to open the door. And I'm terrified that one day, I might. The outskirt. It all started with the doorbell. That I had just moved into a small, quiet house on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place I'd always wanted, peaceful, secluded, with no noisy neighbors or traffic to deal with. The house itself was nothing fancy, but it had a certain charm to it, with a cozy front porch and a large backyard surrounded by trees. I thought it would be the perfect place to start fresh. The first few days were uneventful. I spent most of my time unpacking, getting used to the space, and enjoying the silence. It felt like a much-needed break from the chaos of the city. But about a week after moving in, things took a strange turn. That it was a Friday night, and I was sitting in the living room, watching TV. It was late, probably around midnight, and I was just about to turn in for the night when the doorbell rang. It wasn't a soft ring either. It was loud and clear, echoing through the quiet house. My immediate thought was that it was odd for someone to be ringing my doorbell so late, especially out here, where no one ever visited. I paused the TV and went to the front door, half expecting it to be a delivery or maybe a neighbor coming to introduce themselves. But when I opened the door, no one was there. The porch was empty, the street beyond my driveway was deserted, and there was no sign of anyone. I stepped outside and looked around the yard, even down the road. Still nothing. There weren't any footprints in the dirt near the porch, and I hadn't heard a car pull up or drive away. It was just quiet. Too quiet. I shrugged it off, figuring it was probably just some kids playing a prank, and went back inside. I wasn't exactly scared, but something about the situation made me uneasy. I locked the door, double-checked the windows, and went to bed. The next night, the same thing happened. I was getting ready for bed when the doorbell rang again, this time around 1 a.m. I immediately felt a sense of dread wash over me. I hesitated, standing in the hallway, staring at the front door like it might open by itself. Eventually, I forced myself to go check. Again, no one was there. The porch was empty, just like the night before. But this time, I felt something different. It was subtle, but the air outside seemed colder than it should have been. A chill ran down my spine, and I quickly closed the door, locking it behind me. For the next few nights, the doorbell rang at odd hours, always late, always when I was about to go to sleep. Every time I checked the porch, it was the same story. No one there, nothing out of place. I started to feel paranoid. I even went so far as to install a security camera above the front door, thinking I could catch whoever was messing with me. The first night after setting up the camera, I felt a little more at ease. I figured that if the doorbell rang again, at least I'd have some footage to look at. That night, the doorbell rang at 2:30 a.m. My heart pounded as I checked the camera feed on my phone. Nothing. The footage showed the porch, still and empty, just as I'd seen it with my own eyes. No movement, no visitors, no pranksters hiding in the bushes. Just a perfectly normal, empty porch that I started to lose sleep over it. Every time the doorbell rang, I felt more and more uneasy. The security camera showed nothing, but I knew something was happening. It didn't feel like a simple prank anymore. There was a pattern, always late at night, always when I was alone, and always with no explanation that a few days later, something changed. It was around 3 a.m. when the doorbell rang, and I was already on edge. I checked the camera feed immediately, but this time, the screen flickered. Static flashed across the image, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw something. It was only a split second, but I could have sworn there was a figure standing at the edge of the porch, just out of the camera's range. I froze, staring at the screen, trying to process what I had just seen. The static disappeared, and the porch looked normal again, empty. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, had been standing there. That I didn't sleep at all that night. The next day, I tried to convince myself that it was just a glitch. Cameras mess up all the time, right? Maybe it was nothing. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. That shadowy figure, just barely visible in the corner of the screen, it felt real. That I decided to stay up late again, hoping to catch whatever it was in the act. Around 3 a.m., the doorbell rang again, louder this time. My heart was racing as I checked the camera, half expecting another glitch or worse. The screen was clear, but the figure was back. That it stood at the edge of the porch, just barely visible in the shadows. Tall, dark, and unmoving. I couldn't make out any features, but it was definitely there, looming in the darkness. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead as I stared at the screen, unable to look away. Then, it moved, slowly, almost imperceptibly. The figure stepped closer to the door. My breath caught in my throat. It didn't have a face, just a dark, blank shape, like a shadow that had taken form. I couldn't explain it, but I knew it wasn't human. There was something wrong about it. That I slammed my phone down, unable to watch any longer, and bolted the door shut. My mind was racing, trying to come up with a logical explanation, but there wasn't one. I could feel the air around me grow colder, the same unnatural chill I'd felt before. Then, the doorbell rang again. And again. And again that I backed away from the door, heart pounding, as the ringing became more frantic, like someone, or something, was desperately trying to get in. I grabbed my phone and called the police, trying to sound as calm as possible, but they didn't seem to take me seriously. They said they'd send someone to check, but I knew they wouldn't find anything. Whatever was out there wasn't something the police could deal with. The ringing finally stopped, but the silence that followed was worse. It felt heavy and oppressive, like the air itself was waiting for something to happen. That's when I heard the knocking. Soft at first, almost polite, but growing louder, more forceful. The knock wasn't coming from the front door this time. It was coming from the back of the house. From the bedroom window that I turned slowly, terrified of what I might see. There, standing just outside the window, was the figure. It was closer now, its dark form pressed against the glass like it was trying to peer inside. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The knocking stopped, but the figure didn't move. It just stood there, staring at me through the window with its featureless face, as if it was waiting for me to do something. That I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in fear, but eventually, the figure faded away into the night. The air in the room slowly warmed up, and I collapsed onto the bed, shaking uncontrollably. That I moved out the next day. That I don't know what it was, or why it targeted me, but I couldn't stay there any longer. I left everything behind, the house, the camera, even most of my belongings. I just couldn't risk going back. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear it, the doorbell. It rings once, sharp and clear, even though I'm miles away from that house. And every time it does, I feel the same cold dread wash over me, like it's still out there, waiting for me to answer.